Global capability centers are now a well understood phenomenon. There are close to 1,800 global capability centers. The projection is about 2,400 by 2030.
In global capability centers, what we saw was clients that are in EMEA or in the Americas, they're requiring access to digital first talent at scale that they're not able to get. And when you look to these talent-rich locations, India being one, this is a market to get that talent at scale.
Are you seeing today much faster setting up time, hiring, acquisition of talent?
What we're finding in some of these transformations that maybe takes 12 or 18 or 24 months, this within 3 months, there's a GCC that they can start populating.
What's caused the acceleration that we've seen?
Now you have the combination of AI-first processes powered by technology, proof that proximity is not required in all the spaces where we thought it once was.
Hello and welcome to Accenture Viewpoint Season 3, our platform where leaders decode what's next in business, technology and transformation. This season, we explore how global capability centers are shifting from support engines to strategic value creators. I'm joined by Paul Jeruchimowitz, Senior Managing Director and Global GCC Practice Lead at Accenture, someone who's had a front row seat to this evolution, with GCCs now driving innovation, talent strategy and end-to-end operations for the world's biggest enterprises. Paul brings clarity on what's fueling this shift and why India is at the center of it and what will define the next generation of high-performing capability centers. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on this special show. So, before I start, I thought, I'll ask you, global capability centers are now a well understood phenomenon. Now, this was not the case a few years ago. I was wondering, was there a moment of epiphany that you encountered where you said or you felt that, oh, here is a business that can actually be run remotely and from India in a way that's sort of different than perhaps has been done before and can add value to the mothership and help growth and expansion and so on?
Yeah, well, I think in global capability centers, what we saw was that our clients that are in EMEA or in the Americas, they're requiring access to digital first talent at scale that they're not able to get in high volumes in the markets where they operate. So it's anything that's really a distinctive capability for the company that also requires from the benefit of combining with technology and ecosystem partners. And some examples of that, if we think about drug discovery, that might be a core capability of a life sciences company, but different, or there's an opportunity in the Global Capability Center to bring together R&D, scientists with technology, with ecosystem partners, all that are in the same environment or geography to accelerate drug discovery and make it more effective and efficient and affordable to maximize the number of experiments that they can run, for example, which really then amplifies their or accelerates their speed to market.
Right, and drug discovery and life sciences is an interesting example because we are talking about fairly high intensity research and development, which is plugged into the core of what the company does. And how have you seen that transition in the context of drugs and life sciences?
Well, I think if I just step back, that we think with our clients about their full global talent strategy and what is what's the right work in the right place and in the right access to talent. And so I think within that is what is distinctive to their company, where they need access to more talent, and therefore the Global Capability Center concept. But also within the same model is what are things that are being done today that are more measurable, repeatable, procedural, transactional, that actually the way to address it is with technology. And so it's a blended model of what's talent first that we might see in the Global Capability Center, what's technology first that we might get from managed services providers who have the wherewithal to invest in the level of technology, and then how do we bring all of that together in terms of what the outcome is, which in this case might be speed to market or getting drugs to patients faster.
What's caused the acceleration that we've seen? Global capability centers today are huge in India. There are, depending on which number we look at, there are close to 1,800 global capability centers. The projection is about 2,400 by 2030, which is barely 4 years from now. So it's a few global capability centers coming up every week. So At some point, the phenomenon seems to have accelerated. So, what's caused the acceleration and the shift in your mind?
Yeah, I think the role that technology plays in reinventing all value chains or business processes or functions is one driver. We're still talking about how companies are adjusting their operating model and talent strategy after the pandemic, which even though it was only 4 or 5 years ago, companies are still or learned lessons that proximity is not required in all the spaces where they thought it once was. And so now in places where that are more core to the business, like we've discussed, commercial, supply, R&D, technology innovation, where there was a previous thought that proximity was required, we've proven that it's not. And so now you have the combination of AI-first processes powered by technology, proof that proximity is not required in all the spaces where we thought it once was, and then a requirement to really shift the talent in the companies that we're working with from somebody that might have been a deep functional expert, a deep accountant who understands accounting rules, now to somebody that is AI first, that knows enough about accounting that they're not going to create a controls issue. So that's a different talent base that's required. And when you look to these talent-rich locations, India being one, and the degree of which STEM graduates, STEM education, focus of that talent production, this is a market to get that talent at scale, where in some of the geographies where they operate, they can get a half dozen or a dozen really genius data scientists or thought leaders around AI and reinvention of processes with AI. In a market like this one, we're talking 500 or 1,000, right? So a much different scale in terms of talent generation and access and availability.
So you talked about proximity, and that's obviously a cultural factor about the desire to hold things close, and particularly research and development, and more so, I'm guessing, in life sciences companies. But where would you say, from your vantage point again, are most large companies in this journey of moving to, let's say, a greater degree of let's say decentralization, the ability to set up a global capability center, the ability to pass on or let go, so to speak?
Increasing adoption and understanding usually starts with coming to see what's possible. There's also triggers in certain industries where there's one leader that others then want to learn from and follow, and it's been a great environment of sharing and showing and telling. I think also the governance model and the ownership model and the interaction model and the way that culture plays into it is also increasingly important level of leadership that you see in the GCC. And so a shift from what might have been a decade ago or some time ago about service provision and a service provider mindset with SLAs and KPIs, that's kind of behind us. Now to saying instead, how can we have full accountability and ownership in the Global Capability Center around a product or a product owner set? So now you have leaders in the Global Capability Center that are thought partners and peers to the C-suite or maybe the C-suite minus one as one global team. It's a connection to a global team. It's another office in a network, just like you might open an R&D center in some other part of the world. This is just another one of those R&D centers. So that's really changed in terms of the collaboration. And then another that we might get into is the cultural immersion. There, for a long time, we focused on how do we create the corporate headquarter culture here in the GCC. Well, now there's the reverse cultural immersion of saying in the GCC, we've created this environment where technology and data and process experts and ecosystem partners are working together in a more collaborative way than you'll find back at global headquarters that still operate perhaps in functionally siloed ways. And so we actually want the GCC to teach ways of working and cultural collaboration back to headquarters. And so it's not a one-way cultural immersion, but rather a two-way cultural immersion.
And are there examples, not specific companies, but in sectors that you've seen, let's say, a greater degree of two-way flow or osmosis than perhaps others?
Yeah, if I think, and in every industry, there'll be some that are doing very well and some that aren't. But if I categorize broadly as an industry, I think maturity also plays a part of it. And so, at least for what I've seen, there are some examples in banking and capital markets, also high tech, where you will have seen substantial. Well, there's a lot of scale, but also maturity, as well as in some of those industries holding the the GCC as the primary product owner. So actually the thought leadership may be coming from the Global Capability Center. Retail is another one where we've seen just more companies looking to learn from others, and a lot of retailers that are operating global capability centers here in India, where you'll see things like store design, planogram, but also pricing elasticity, agentic merchandising, retail analytics. That thought leadership and experimentation coming from here, right, and then bringing that innovation back to the headquarters. So banking, capital markets, high tech, retail. I'm sure there's many others, but those are some that I've visited in the last months.
Right, and I'm assuming the first GCCs that were set up slowly, as in there was a gentle process of disengagement or re-engagement from mothership, and the GCCs in India began to maybe set up, and maybe I'm sure it was driven by leadership as well, or local leadership. Are you seeing today much faster, let's say, setting up time, much faster hiring, and much faster talent, acquisition of talent? And my question is, how is this process of speed different from what it was earlier? And at least, are you able to change that?
Yeah, so very much dramatic difference because of the various ways that models have merged from what used to be a choice to a merger of models, and also some alliance partnerships that really drive acceleration. So just for example, I worked with a client who had a lot of experience. He was at a kind of a technology company, then he was at a snacking company, then he was at an industrial products company. All had a lot of experience in this space, and then he went to a retailer, and at first thought, hey, there's no way in our culture we would ever have a global capability center. And then he visited and got an understanding that today we have pay-as-you-grow models, incubation spaces, partners where you could park through an SPV or a SPAC, a legal entity that then becomes transferable with more expedited time frame. There are examples today of GCCs. We used to have this mindset that you had to have at least 500 or at least 250 or some scale to get started. Today we have examples of GCCs of less than 10 that are proving a concept in an incubation space. No regrets. If it doesn't work, you close, no problem. If it does work, you scale into your own spaces. So much more flexibility in these models that are less capital intensive, allow you to get started quickly, and from there, scale the talent quite rapidly. So we have some that we've seen in a matter of weeks or months, where it used to be many months to a year.
The concept of incubation in this context is quite fascinating. And are you right now, as we speak, incubating many such ventures?
Yeah. So, and this comes through an alliance partnership we have that I think is maybe well known in the market. That there are. I'm trying to think of a best example, but where within that a few clients that I visited this week that started in the shared incubation space. Maybe in the 10 to 20, these are the ones that are coming to mind are both retail. It is in the starting with technology, tech first, but tech for business. So it's technology that's working alongside merchandising or working alongside a development of a consumer app or a loyalty program. Starting small like that in this incubation space, and then in the meantime, and that's it's a no regrets move because it's the pay as you grow concept. And it also, what we're finding in some of these transformations that maybe takes, the full transformation, which should be always on, but it does take 12 or 18 or 24 months. This, within 3 months, creates an option for leaders that might have, maybe, again, they're constrained with talent and they want to hire more right away, or they have a budget challenge that they want to address right away. So it also creates, while other big decisions are being made, there's a GCC that they can start populating. So it also becomes a change management enabler to get leaders to start trying and experimenting within the GCC. So those are some examples that are starting in the 10 to 15 range of headcount. And in the meantime, their permanent space is being developed. And over 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, they move out of incubation into the permanent space, of course, assuming the things that are incubating are delivering the value they expected.
Right. Let's talk about talent then, since that you touched upon it already. Now, talent accretion and then subsequently enrichment is a process. Now, from your own experience, what's the best way to go about it? How are, let's say, the successful GCCs going about it or have gone about it? And what are the lessons in doing so? So we've talked about time, and you've explained how it can be really crunched now and is being crunched. What about the people and the people-linked processes that drive all of this?
Yeah, so it's important in all of these GCCs to have a focus and room in your business case to spend time and money on the EVP, so the employee value proposition. Not only making sure that the market is aware of your brand, but in particular the type of work that people in the GCC would be asked to perform, and how that contributes to the overall value or mission or purpose of the company. Super important. So it's not so much, that I'm working at this retailer, but what work am I doing at the retailer? I think part of that too is back to a comment I had made earlier about making sure that the GCC has the right work within it. A lot of times the headquarters, and again, if it's Europe or Americas, will say, well, do we have a brand? Maybe we don't have a brand, and how will we be able to attract the best talent? What we find is that it's not actually about the name of the company. It's about the type of work that the people are being asked to perform. And there's many examples of companies that I live in the US that I've never heard of that have thriving GCCs. But the flip side of that is to make sure that the GCC has the right work in it, and that we're not asking for a GCC to do routine transactional work that might be best served by a managed services provider, not because it's transactional work, but because the managed services provider will invest in the technology. And so the type of work that you put in is super important, and then that translated in the EVP and branding that I had mentioned, as a way to attract best talent.
I mean, right now as we speak, there is a lot of work going on by major corporations, as you said, setting up GCCs, some of them doing it as captive incubations, and then slowly expanding or simultaneously, incubating and setting up their permanent setup. How is the talent war in all of this? And you talked about, of course, making things interesting for people and therefore ensuring that they stay on. But how easy or difficult is it to find people for some of these industries that we talked about right now?
Yeah, there are many examples. A life sciences company that I worked with that had targeted 2,600 in their GCC in Hyderabad within 1 year time, and they're already at 3,500 because of the demand and proving back, the demand from the business, but also the success they've had in the market. There's a retail GCC that has ambitions to grow to 4,000 and 1,000 in 1 year that hired 385 in the first 2 to 3 months. And so there does seem to be evidence that the talent is available with the right processes and EVP to, again, attract the talent. There are, of course, the more and more the GCCs are moving up the value chain into really core distinctive work for companies, there have been some roles that are difficult to get, difficult to access, difficult to get, that maybe do remain open longer than the headquarters would like. So that does happen in some specialized spaces. And of course, the ecosystem seizes and works together to try and fill it. You also find maybe some of the wage covering some of those difficult to get positions by increasing wages, right? Where the clients are willing to pay, or the companies are willing to pay above market, to attract best talent into those roles.
Right, and just to come back to leadership, I know there's very high quality of leadership in GCCs today, but what's the best way to approach it? I mean, do you bring people from headquarters to run GCCs? Do you recruit locally? Is it a blend of both?
The two things that you're trying to accomplish at the same time is somebody that knows how to operate a GCC, that knows how to tap into the ecosystem partners, that knows culturally what it takes around recruiting and onboarding and culture within the place, and also has the right level of seniority and influence with the C-suite members and business unit partners that they'll be working with. Depending on where the company is in their journey and their understanding of kind of ways of working with a global talent pool, you may also need to infuse the company culture, and not so much from the GCC side, but the ways of working back at headquarters or in the business, to encourage adoption, to experiment with new things, to make sure that the business is being held accountable for making the entire ecosystem work. to break down any us versus them, right, and really manage as one team. And so depending on where the company is in their journey, they might need to bring somebody from within. And we do have many cases or examples of people that, in the case of India, but it could be any geography, might be an Indian national that was educated or educated in India and working in some other market that are coming back to India. Many examples of that that I'm thinking through that were interested because of their families or because of their own careers or because they're really excited about what's happening in the GCC market, that they're coming back to run the GCCs. So quite a few examples of that. I think in the case where maybe you're hiring externally from the market because what you're prioritizing is knowing how to run and operate a global capability center and manage the network and community here, is that you have to also think through in the budget, the travel budget, where you may want to accompany that leader with somebody that is coming in from headquarters to focus more on the cultural components and the adoption back at headquarters. So many different models. I know that was different examples, but I think you're trying to solve for both of those things and have to figure out the right ingredients to do it.
Right, and if I were to sort of add a supplemental question to that, so I mean, I interview business leaders who run Indian arms of multinationals and in consumer-facing businesses. So that's one kind of culture, because you have to think local, act global, or act local, think global, and so on. So you have to integrate with the domestic market because your products are selling it. It could be an automotive company or a consumer products company or a bank. Now, this is a little different because in some ways or many ways, you're actually disconnected and you have to remain disconnected from the local market. So how do you, I wonder if this is something that you think about and how, and therefore companies think about even as they set up their GCCs here.
Yeah, even in that one, we've seen a bit of a mix of both. So one company I'm thinking through actually was looking to the GCC to both service globally as well as the local market, and so they might host local HR, local finance, some of the local business functions, and work very closely with the commercial director and so on. Other clients, there might even be a legal entity distinction and separation that is purposeful about that separation, whether they're using a SEZ or not, also could factor into it. And then in that, there are other companies that are, purposefully keeping it separate so that they can really keep the team focused on the right priorities and business outcomes, that they aren't getting distracted by perhaps local business fires. So we've seen all of those different kinds of models. I will say though that in your question, the type of leader that you need is moving. We have a kind of a from to that says 10 years ago, you might have had somebody with deep functional acumen that has knowledge of running something efficiently and effectively, dare I say, a factory floor, which is a dirty word we don't like using. That's the from. The to is from functional leader to business leader, right? From somebody who's focused on efficiency, effectiveness, SLAs, to somebody who's focused on business outcomes the CEO would talk about around whatever it is, around speed or growth or margin improvement. And so that's a different kind of profile of leader, whether they're focused also in the local market where the company may have a commercial business or not. It's still a commercial leader mindset that we see required to lead GCCs.
Right, and I'm going to come to how the outlook is for GCCs in general and specific. Before I do that, I mean, I'm sure there are organizations that have stumbled along the way, and maybe for short periods, maybe for longer periods. What are some of the key lessons that you feel one can take away from those stumbles, which other people should be cognizant of?
First off, we need to make sure that we're designing end to end, right? So not only the work that's happening in the GCC and how it interacts with work that's happening outside of the GCC, but also changing the roles for the people that are not in the GCC, right? So people back at corporate headquarters or in a business unit, how are the expectations of their roles changing? Then how do we hold everybody jointly accountable for the success of the new talent ecosystem that's been established, so that when something goes wrong, because something always will go wrong, that we're reinforcing the model that's been put in place and not saying, hey, don't worry, I'll take care of you here, which of course destroys trust in the model. And with that also is the change in the metrics and incentives associated with people's roles, so that they're all each being held accountable to their new role in whatever end-to-end capability that I'm describing has been designed. There's also talk about this. A lot of people talk about HQ1, HQ2, and is this an HQ2? And just while I like the idea, right, because it should be thought of as a talent strategy that all C-suite members can access the talent hub in the GCC, there are also some bad behaviors maybe of HQ1 that we need to make sure not to copy in HQ2. And I had mentioned some of those good collaboration examples that we had in the past, but I visited some GCCs where there's again, it's a consumer goods company, and the consumer goods company developed an insight for one customer of theirs, which would be a retailer, but they didn't share it with another customer team. Why? Because the managers back at HQ1 didn't ask them to. Or a similar example where you have consumer insights and customer insights, or the insight being shared back about the placement of how visible the protein content is on something, which would really drive growth of that particular product, not being adopted because one brand manager likes to take the insights and another brand manager works in a different way. So there's something about this HQ1, HQ2 that we need to make sure HQ2 is not a copy of HQ1, but rather disrupts what is the pain points about HQ1 as also a lesson learned that we can take forward. And the GCCs aren't always asked to do that. So we need to really empower the voice of the GCC to make sure that those changes of ways of working or insights are adopted to drive whatever it is, business growth, speed, cost efficiency, et cetera.
And are there examples that come to your mind on the reverse flow of either a cultural tenet or a way of working or a SOP where you've seen really the flow from the GCC to the parent?
Well, it's an idea that we have, so I wouldn't say it's there quite yet. But is there, with technology, can we create a more seamless experience that does connect the teams? So of course, we're able to bring. In the GCC, we're able to bring operations and tech and business functions and data and ecosystem partners together in a way that maybe headquarters can't. But what if we could also pull headquarters into that? And there is some technologies where maybe it started as a virtual coffee chat from years ago, where you could create a screen type of experience for people to interact. Now we're able to do, and it's a vision, so it's not quite there, but we're able to do more with white noise and actually have meetings where people are physically looking at each other. We're able to build end-to-end pods. So we're thinking with a lot of our clients about value chain reinvention that would bring together, let's say, finance with supply chain, with HR, with merchandising into an integrated value chain. What if we can do that cross geography as well and have a pod sitting together in the GCC, a pod sitting together at headquarters, and some way of bringing those teams together with technology? We have some renderings and think that we could build something like that, which is more of not so much a thematic cultural immersion, but really a living and breathing in the everyday, every minute of how the teams operate and cooperate.
Right. As we look ahead, Paul, it's clear that we're going to see more and more GCCs come up. I mean, if I were to go by some of the studies, we're looking at almost one a day, or at least one every day of the working week in the next 4 years until 2030. So my question is, from your vantage point, once again, what are the biggest opportunities that you see? I mean, whichever way you slice it, either vertically or horizontally, and essentially, who will sort of succeed? Though success is a very relative metrics, it's not like you're fighting with other GCCs, but who will, in whichever way you define it, what will success truly mean?
Yeah, I think it's starting or in the early part of the thinking that we understand the business outcomes of what we hope to achieve, or the client company hopes to achieve by entering into the GCC, and then designing against that business outcome, which for everything we do, and especially as you look forward to 2030, is how does AI play into that? For GCCs, we spent a lot of time here talking about the talent and getting the best talent, but to get the best human and machine together to drive agentic workflows, we need more than talent. We need technology investment. We might need ecosystem partnerships, startup environment, technology partners as well that not only bring technology, but bring the technology know-how. And so if I were starting today, I would maybe design very differently than if I was starting 10 or 15 years ago, to design it to leverage that ecosystem combination. And so we'll see innovative ideas coming around shared floors. We'll see build, operate, transfer concepts of capabilities inside a client-owned and operated GCC. We'll definitely, I think, see again, not only the idea of technology and ecosystem, but really living and breathing together in co-working spaces. I think that's going to be the recipe of success. And by the way, if we were talking about the recipe of success for a corporate headquarters or a business unit headquarters, they would have the same ingredients. And that's an important idea, is that the GCC is just another part of that global ecosystem that reinvents work and work processes, right? It's not a separate or distant office. And so a lot of the things I described would be true of the reinvention of any workspace, but very much here if I were designing today for the future.
Right, and your sort of advice for global leaders who are looking to set up GCCs or beginning to go down that path today?
So I'll start with making sure that you have the right talent model for the right type of work, right? And that in the GCC in particular, the purpose is clear with regards to what the GCC is going to do to get talent attraction, how they're going to do it with regards to how they're leveraging AI and ecosystem partners to reinvent the work process. Also, in many cases, the GCC may be the architect from where they get talent, and so that might mean that sometimes it's in the GCC, sometimes it's with managed services partners as part of that. And so I think very much thinking about the work that's in the GCC, the outcomes that it creates, and then the network and ecosystem that they require to get there. I think also the idea of, for many organizations, which maybe we've over-rotated towards, is the proof of value, so value marketing type of capability. And what I mean by that is making sure that the wins are communicated across the organization broadly, that business leaders have access not only to an email with those wins, but that they're coming to the GCC to work on business problems together with the talent in the GCC. And I think as part of that too is not only celebrating the wins, but also being very open about the difficulties and the pain points, because there has been some movement towards maybe an over-rotation towards the value marketing story, and maybe behind the scenes it's not as pretty as the story that's told. I think we need a more blended story, but very open and authentic communication that goes back to the enterprise, so that what you build today scales and becomes, it's not a one-time project, right? It's a ongoing part of the overall operating model that should have continuous movement in and out of capabilities.
Right, and I'm sure you get asked this question about, if as Accenture, you're also a IT services company or a managed services provider, and you're also working on the GCC side. So do people feel that there is any conflict here, or are these two very distinct offerings?
Yeah, what we're motivated by is helping our clients reinvent, and reinvent their capabilities and deliver transformative outcomes. And that's regardless of how they choose to source the work. We believe very much in a best sourcing model where there's some things that's best served through technology with managed services and some things that are best served through the client's own distinctive capability and talent. What we want to make sure is we've had our operations business somewhere from the early 90s. We have a lot of experience with transitioning work, with operating work, with transforming work, with bringing modern tech to that work. And so we want to make sure that all of the assets that we've built and lessons that we've learned are available to our clients regardless of how they choose to source the work. Also, in this idea of blended sourcing, there are many examples of how we bring, whether it be our SynOps platform focused on process reinvention, efficiency, effectiveness, and insights that come from process, or GenWizard that is all about modern tech and bringing Gen AI through technology reinvention. There are some other platforms, but those two primarily, that our clients in their global capability centers have access to the same technology that you'd see in our operation. And that's back to your acceleration question as well. We should be able to start a GCC with the same sort of smart floor operation from day one that maybe historically would have taken time to arrive to. Well, now from day one, you could have that same kind of experience that you'd have at an Accenture managed services floor in your own global capability center. So that's been a big focus of ours. And it's not just about the technology. It's also about people that have experience doing transition and mobilization, people that have experience building that way of working in the GCC, helping set that up, and or even another is if you want to scale fast, there could be seeding of talent to get started quick that then either remains with you or recedes. So all of these models have come closer and closer together. But most importantly, Accenture wants to bring that experience that we've developed over decades to our clients, regardless of how they choose to source the work in our innovation, our investment, our talent, as well as our technology and tools.
Right. Last question. So, as you look ahead again, are there businesses or sectors where you feel there is, of course, opportunity, but you feel that people are still hesitating to take that step and actually go ahead and set up a GCC? Or, on the other hand, have we covered all the possible ground, and now it's really about diving deeper and deeper and more strategically embedding technology into it?
Yeah, it's interesting because and many of these come out as what I'd call old wives' tales, but there are some cultures within certain industries where they're concerned about compliance or controls or regulators and regulatory bodies. There could be also some industries where where data is hosted and housed, just where it lives geographically could be a question. But at the same time, the reason I started by saying, are those old wives' tales, is that you'll find that in some of the banking and capital markets and insurance industries that have all of those ingredients of regulator and controls and compliance and risk have been some of the most scaled adopters of the global capability center model. So it does beg the question, are those real blockers or not? But you'll find in there's also some businesses that are very regional. So electric and gas utilities tends to be quite regional. We do work in health and public service or hospital systems that are asking questions, but also maybe are slower to adopt because of the regionalization. There are also, even in grocery chains, there are some global, but tend to be quite regional. And those are the examples of, hey, even though we are very regional, we are accessing this type of talent in places like India or elsewhere. But there are some slower to adopt industries. I will just comment quickly on a growing industry that we've seen is, what we've seen is we think about the market in setup and in transformation. And so many of the Fortune 500 will already have some setup that's in place. And so we see a shift more towards transformation of those that have stabilized, have now an opportunity to transform. But on the setup market, moving into middle market, as well as in private equity, a lot of interest either at the firm level or at the portco level, because of the idea also that we had talked about on, does scale matter as much as it used to? Can we do it faster? And so in particular in middle market and private equity, there's a lot of interest in smaller GCCs that might have more niche skills core to the goals and objectives of the company very fast, right? Because they might need to enter or exit very quickly, depending on what they do with their business. In particular, I heard some stories this week around fintech, and what a fintech company will look their GCC to do is core to the product development of the company. So I know you asked about broadly, but I just wanted to add some of that where we see the growth in the market right now on the setup side.
Right. Paul, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.